Welcome back to The Big Picture. I'm Olivier Knox. I tweet at OKNOX, and joining me now is Jessica Lee, Senior Research Fellow in the East Asia Program at the Quincy Institute. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jessica, I was trying to make sense of what's going on in North Korea, whether it's coronavirus or these missile tests, as well as U.S. policy. I mean, it was striking to me as a student of foreign policy that the president didn't mention North Korea in his State of the Union speech.
That's right. In fact, I had written an article on the Quincy Institute website advising the president on some of the things he might mention at the State of the Union. But of course, as you noted, he didn't mention North Korea at all, which I think poses a different set of questions about how high of a priority North Korea remains for President Trump. But as you noted, this is there's so much going on in the region. You noted coronavirus. And the fact that North Korea happens to border China and South Korea. The latter, of course, like Japan, has a very sophisticated and modern public health system, but North Korea, in contrast, does not. And so there's grave concern, rightfully, I think, in the international community about North Korea's ability to counter that virus.
Do we have any information coming out of North Korea about the possible spread of this outbreak there?
Sure. Well, they were mum for quite some time, and in recent days have stated that they are actually monitoring and containing up to about 7,000 people, which, objectively speaking, I would say, is good because the World Health Organization recommends for all countries to monitor and contain as much as possible COVID-19. And so it seems that North Korea is doing what it should be doing, but of course, we have no idea if these numbers are in fact true or if the virus has actually spread much more rapidly and widely throughout the country.
Right. Well, that last bit's kind of important. The question of how reliable the data is coming out of North Korea. I mean, I have I have sort of a reporter's sketch of the North Korean economy, North Korean military, North Korean aspirations. I have nothing on the state of North Korean health.
Right. And in fact, in a recent article that I wrote, I had spoken to a medical doctor, a neurosurgeon, Dr. Kee Park at Harvard Medical School about this. And he and others that I've, had a chance to speak, are concerned that, as the international sanctions has really, eroded North Korea's ability to receive humanitarian aid and to build its own, healthcare infrastructure, that this has created sort of a perfect storm whereby an epidemic like the coronavirus could really wipe out large, pockets of the country. And so this has huge implications, as you said, not just for their, the global health and sort of the public health of North Korea, but also U.S. service members and of course, our ally South Korea. We have 28,500 American service members who are stationed in South Korea. And so, the fact that we have sort of a black hole in South Korea's northern border, I do worry that we could be, in for some very unpleasant surprise without more transparency by Pyongyang.
But there would how much? There's not that much interaction, right, across that border. I'd be more worried about. I'd be more worried about China into North Korea, and then possibly, North Korean smugglers heading elsewhere, than I would be about the North to South Korea axis.
That's true. I mean, the DMZ is one of the most fortified, border barriers separating the two countries in the world. There's landmines and all kinds of things that prevent ordinary people from crossing the border on the 30th parallel. That's absolutely true. I guess, still, North Koreans have a very strong economic relationship with China, and, some of the elite are able to travel outside of North Korea for various reasons. And so, I think the concern and the possibility of the virus spreading without it being properly contained and treated, inside North Korea remain.
The other thing that this whole this outbreak and North Korea had me thinking about was the number of North Koreans who are deployed as laborers in other countries. That's right.
In places like China and Russia and other countries where North Korea has diplomatic relations with, it has laborers in those countries. That's part of the way the North Korean regime is able to, earn cash. And so those laborers, are also, potentially, carriers of this virus. And so this, I think the bottom line is the more information we have, the better. And right now, there's just not a lot of information flowing out of Pyongyang to know the degree to which the virus has spread and affected both its core urban population in Pyongyang as well as rural communities where healthcare system is even more decrepit.
I was wondering whether we might get more data from those other countries, though, about whether North Korea is still sending out laborers or is calling them home or something like that.
Yeah, I would have to look into that, but that's a fair question in terms of how they are trying to contain and kind of call back those folks as part of their overall effort to try and contain this virus from spreading.
I did a quick scan and I didn't see anything online that gave me any sort
Neither did I, but maybe this is a developing story, but that's a good point in terms of, how quickly they sort of deal with the laborers issue.
Jessica, do we have any historical guidance on how North Korea responds to an outbreak? Do we know anything about how they responded to H1N1? Do we know how they responded to SARS? Do we have any sort of, even anecdotal information about how that government responds when it's faced with an outbreak like this?
Sure. I mean, I saw an interesting article in 38 North about that and North Korean government's past attempts and efforts to curb the spread of SARS and so forth. And, and they've largely been successful. Of course, the outbreak, I think, were, less rapid in terms of their spread across the region. And so there isn't really a good historical analysis, on this case, just given that it's really taken the whole East Asia region by the storm. So this is a new challenge, a new level of challenge. Both countries that have very modern public health systems like South Korea, Japan, and Italy are struggling to contain it. And so the questions about North Korea's ability to contain it, I think, are even more unknown, but pressing.
I'm talking to Jessica Lee. She's a senior research fellow in the East Asia program at the Quincy Institute. We're talking about North Korea, the U.S. relationship, the coronavirus outbreak, and let's tackle this latest missile firing. What do we know? Well,
we heard this past Sunday that North Korea tested some short-range ballistic missiles, which came after about a 3-month break. And it also came about 4 days after the United States and South Korea announced that they were postponing the annual joint drills due to concerns about the coronavirus. And so, I think in my view, I mean, we don't really ever know why North Korea does what it does, but it seems to me that, the regime is interested in, showing some strength, that, it is still maintaining readiness and has a lot of different ways of threatening the region, but also a reminder to the international community outside of North Korea that this is a very dangerous problem that I think, poses some serious and fundamental questions about whether the U.S. strategy of maximum pressure is working and producing the outcomes that we seek.
Is the United States still getting Russian and Chinese cooperation on maximum pressure? I feel like that's a recurring issue.
That is a recurring issue. So much of U.S. economic sanctions rides on countries like China and Russia to help implement the existing sanctions. And so we need their support and cooperation. And China and Russia several months ago in December, posed, a more flexible approach at the UN that would create some space for partial sanctions relief in exchange for, more progress on the denuclearization talks. And I don't think it's gotten a lot of traction. It doesn't seem like U.S. government is interested in that approach. I think one criticism of the China-Russia proposal is that it didn't really spell out what North Korea would have to do in exchange for, potential sanctions relief. What kind of dismantlement or, inspections we would expect them to do. So it can't just be a gift to North Korea. There has to be some give and take on both sides. And I think that's the kind of work that our diplomats are trained to do. But unfortunately, talks have completely stopped since Stockholm last October. So, again, very dangerous situation. Room for miscalculation is high. And, I wish both the United States and North Korea would just sit down on the negotiating table again and resume talks.
Jessica, is there any sign that John Bolton's departure as National Security Advisor has changed the way the United States is approaching this?
I think there was some sigh of relief, given that Mr. Bolton is widely associated with views more on the regime change side, as opposed to, diplomacy and dialogue and finding a non-military solution out of this nuclear problem with North Korea. But, I think the challenge is, in the United States, we seem to have just completely gotten distracted over both domestic politics with the elections, as well as issues in the Middle East, Afghanistan. And so there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of bandwidth given to the North Korea issue. It seems like a low intensity kind of burning issue rather than, a high priority and urgent problem. And so and that unfortunately has been the tendency in past administrations as well. And so, President Trump really broke out of that and really did the unconventional thing, which was to engage publicly and personally in diplomacy with North Korea. But it seems to be quite episodic as opposed to, the more traditional ways of doing statescraft, which is to have diplomats really consistently, put the time and effort to really figure out a roadmap.
Yeah, when I'm trolling my neocon friends, I joke that the Trump administration has proven without a doubt that the United States can absolutely live with a nuclear-armed North Korea.
Yeah, right, which is sad because, our allies, South Korea and Japan, who are subject to these short-range ballistic missiles, which you asked me about. Those missiles, can definitely take our allies. They can threaten our allies. And so this is not, a small problem. Of course, they also have ICBMs that can threaten the continental United States, as well as, other deadly nuclear devices. And so, this isn't a problem like Iran, for example, where we tried, long and hard to stop Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. North Korea has nuclear weapons. So this is a problem of different order of magnitude in terms of the difficulty level. Yet, we seem to not really be engaged in any meaningful diplomacy with them that will take us away from volatility and unpredictability.
Jessica, one of the things that one of my sources told me about this sort of short range missile launch is that it is every bit as likely to be aimed at overwhelming South Korean missile defenses as it is to be aimed at Japan or somewhere else.
And that could be true. I mean, another, hypothesis that I've read is that with the South Korean National Assembly election coming up in April, that this is another way for North Korea to say, look, Moon Jae-in, the South Korean President Moon Jae-in, really has nothing to show for this. He has utterly failed in bringing about any peace or stability in the region. And so I think there are a lot of different ways that this definitely hurts South Korea, which, many have credited for really midwiving the talks between U.S. and North Korea. And I think it's very unfortunate that these kinds of situations really undermine South Korea most of all.
Jessica, one of the other interesting personnel changes inside the administration was the elevation, essentially, of Steve Biegun to this very senior State Department job. He was the one guy who was actually out there trying to do what Donald Trump says he wants, which is get a deal. Yes,
that's right. And having met with former state special representative, now Deputy Secretary Biegun, he's an excellent and able diplomat. I have been very impressed with him and his level of knowledge and expertise, and really, outreach to folks outside of government for fresh thinking and new ideas. I mean, I think it was disappointing, however, that his deputy, Alex Wong, didn't testify before the House Foreign Affairs Committee as asked, I believe, last week, but instead, chose to speak at the Hudson Institute. And so, not being subject to the scrutiny of public elected officials and, really, depriving the American public of the chance to understand and scrutinize, the administration's policy toward North Korea, I think, does a disservice to our democracy and our form of governance. And so I hope that Mr. Began and Mr. Wong and others who are thinking about North Korea day in and day out, can provide more transparency and information about how the Trump administration is going to address North Korea's threat, which has not waned, and what we should be prepared to do as a country if situations worsen.
Jessica Lee, Senior Research Fellow in the East Asia Program at the Quincy Institute. Jessica, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back with more of The Big Picture. Stick around.